Hello, people. Hello, folks. Great to have you joining us. Welcome to Stratos website webinar. Looks like we have quite a few folks joining us on the line today, which is great. Thank you for taking time to join us. If you like, while we're waiting to get started, you might want to use the chat box that's at the bottom of your screen right in the center. If you click on that, you could let us know maybe where you're participating from, which province or region, territory you're calling in from today. It would be great to see where all of our colleagues are at. So feel free to use the chat function. We've got someone from Nova Scotia, which is wonderful. Welcome. We'll just give people a few more minutes to find their way into the Zoom room. Folks from Ottawa, other colleagues from Nova Scotia, welcome. And if you need to give me a weather report of where you're at, we're always happy to hear that. It's a good Canadian thing to do. We've got folks from Yellowknife, Natural Resources Canada, Vancouver, great. Welcome, folks. And those of you who are just joining us, if you haven't found the chat box along the bottom of your screen, feel free to click the chat box and type in where you're participating from, where you're calling in from today. Folks from PEI, Parks Canada. Oh, PEI has light snow. Other folks here from Ottawa, great to have you. So we'll just take another couple of minutes as people enter the Zoom room. As you're entering the room and the space, I'll just orient you to a couple of features of Zoom that might help you throughout the next hour. You'll notice on the bottom left of your screen is a mute button and a stop video button. So if you wish to not have video, feel free to click that and there'll be a red slash line along the bottom. I think most people join muted as well. And we'll probably keep our settings like that for the webinar today just to help minimize background noise. So we have, looks like about 70 folks joining us so far, which is great. Other folks from Vancouver, people from Ottawa, from Toronto. Good to have you all here. So we'll just maybe wait another 30 seconds just to get people in the room. Hopefully people aren't having too much trouble in terms of connecting. Those of you who are maybe joining by phone, you may not have quite all the same systems and setup as those joining remotely by computer, but hopefully you'll be able to hear and participate in most of the elements we've got set up for today. Great. So I think then it's just shortly after 1. So why don't we get started? So maybe I'll welcome you to navigating the turbulence of COVID-19, transitioning to digital collaboration. We're really excited to have all of you here today, and thank you so much for taking time to join us. If you want, Rebecca, maybe you could go to the first slide. I'll just do a quick recap on some of the participant controls for those of you who aren't as used to using Zoom, or this may be a new tool, and then we'll go into introducing my colleagues that are going to help guide our conversation today. So I've mentioned the mute and unmute button. We'll ask you to continue to leave your systems on mute to help minimize background noise. The same with stop or show video, that's up to you. We can usually see about 6 or 7 folks across the top. That's certainly at your discretion. If you're trying to see some of the videos of the speakers and you're not sure where to position us on your screen, there's some toggle buttons on the top right-hand side of your screen. So feel free to click those, play around with moving the pictures. If you push the pictures up towards the top of the screen, that's usually the best way to see the rest of the deck. And most of you have discovered the chat function. You'll see that generally it's set to everyone, but if there's a need to send an individual message privately, you can just click on the little arrow and it lists all the participants that are there. And if you'd like to send a private message, please go ahead and send that directly. We are going to orient you to some of the polls, the breakout rooms, and the whiteboard activity as we go through. So just listen for the cues as we move along. So hopefully you found your way through Zoom, and we'll get started with the content. Rebecca, I'll go to the next slide. Thanks. So welcome to our webinar. We have 3 co-hosts that we are working together to put this webinar on for you today. My name is Barb Sweezy, and although I have long curly hair in that picture, I now have short hair, but it's still me. I'm Barb. I'm the Director of Organizational Effectiveness at Stratos, and with me I have my colleague Jane Porter, who's a manager at Stratos, and Adam Fryer, a senior consultant, and all 3 of us are just really happy to be here with you today, despite the turbulent times that we are finding ourselves in. For those of you who don't know Stratos, just a couple words about us. We are a privately owned organization, and we do a lot of work with governments, with companies, with civil society, in terms of trying to help discover and support navigation of complex problems that are often facing our clients, particularly as it relates to sustainability issues and natural resource management. And we often define ourselves as problem solvers, as conveners, as facilitators. And it is very much in that spirit that we bring this webinar to you today. Next slide, please, Rebecca. And behind, when I say Rebecca, Rebecca is a big part of our team, although you don't see her face today. She's certainly instrumental in getting this webinar put together. And if you have technical questions, feel free to ask Adam or Rebecca via the chat function. So I just wanted to describe a little bit about why we decided to put this webinar together. Clearly, our world does not look anything like it looked 2 weeks ago with the onset of COVID-19 hitting our country and hitting the world. And we all had to find new ways of doing things in a really quick turnaround time, Stratos included. And as we think about our role that Stratos plays as a convener, as a problem solver, we knew that we had some skills and some experience that we thought maybe we could just share some of our own insights, our own tips and our own tricks that we've been working on building over the last year and really have been putting into place in the last 10 days. And we thought if there's nothing else we can do in the short term, at least we can share some of our experiences with you. And so that's what we have done, is sort of compiled our knowledge and our expertise in this space of digital collaboration, just for the hope that maybe it will create confidence, build a little bit of capacity on your side as you are going to be facing the very same challenges that we have been facing. And so when we were trying to decide what to call our webinar, thinking about this sort of set of skills and challenges that we're all facing, we decided to frame it as digital collaboration. And so we're all sort of a newly remote workforce. And as we think about the way we need to work together and collaborate together, it's all going to be transitioning and has transitioned to digital, to virtual. And we think of that in a few different buckets. That first one being about team communication, collaboration, and convening. It's about the way we run meetings, either in our small groups, the way we talk to our colleagues, but it is also about the way we engage with our external stakeholders and partners. So bringing together people in what we normally would have done maybe as a face-to-face workshop. The middle bucket is about how we manage our information and our data and our workflow. So as an organization, we're used to working with certain sets of information. And when we were in our offices, it worked one way. But now that we're all sitting in our home offices, it's a very different experience. So we've got a few processes that we have improved over the last several months to transition to that. And we thought we'd just share some of our insights with you. And then the final piece about digital collaboration is around information and file management, the spreadsheets that we have to call up and save with a different name and so on. So these are all parts of the digital world that we're living in and the way we used to do business. And so this webinar is really tackling how we can better collaborate. And if we go to the next slide, Rebecca, I'll show you the three main components of our webinar. So the first part of our webinar is about how to rethink or reframe what you normally might have done as a face-to-face meeting and switch it to a virtual one. In terms of the second component of our webinar, it is really about good meeting practices. Now that we're all having our meetings by teleconference or by webinar, these are some good best practices. And those two first components are really about those meeting experiences that we normally have done face-to-face and how to transition them. And we're hoping a lot of the tips that we can give to you today are ones that you'll be able to action right away. The third component that Adam will be leading us through is more about that workflow and the data and how to design tools to collaborate more effectively as we're all spread out, but still having requirements to manage our information. And so we're hoping that you can pick and choose from the different components of our webinar, knowing that some will be more directly applicable to you immediately, and others you may need to talk to folks within your team to progress or to advance. But we hope to spark some new ideas for you and some new practices. We'll go ahead to the next slide, please. So to get us warmed up for the day, I thought that maybe we would just ask you to think about, okay, we have now all been working from home for about 10 days, 8 days. What tips and tricks have you discovered this past week or this past 10 days that have helped you make the transition from office to working from home? And so maybe you can chat in, use the chat function and share with everyone what are some of those tips and tricks that you've discovered. It's made your transition a little bit easier. What's working for you? Oh, someone has suggested getting dressed. That was a big win. Hopefully getting dressed means just out of pajamas, but I'll let you decide that. Virtual coffee breaks with coworkers have been an example. Carving out a dedicated workspace. These are great ideas. Go easy on yourself. Don't feel guilty. Having the right equipment. Scheduling some time outside. These are great suggestions. A separate place to work and relax. And some folks are talking about new tools that they've got going, like WhatsApp. So thank you for continuing to put these in. They're great. And what we wanted to let you know, we also were kind of going through this same learning curve in the last 10 days. And so we crowdsourced some of our ideas at Stratos and put them together in a tip sheet. If you'd like to go check that out at some point, feel free to pop into our website. Sounds like most of you have them covered. But we really emphasized, number one, taking care of you, which many of you have identified, staying connected with some of the tools that you have identified in your chat line, like Slack and Zoom, and then setting a good tone and a good spirit amongst your team and your leaders. So that's the way chat function works. So you can imagine that I'm talking to a room of about 100 people right now, and everyone's popped up their hands or put something on a sticky note, and that's essentially what the group chat has allowed us to share information quite quickly and generate good content. So welcome to our webinar. At this time, I'm going to turn things straight over to Jane Porter, who's going to walk us through the first component of our webinar. Remember, you can use the chat function throughout the seminar to identify questions you might have. At the end of each segment, we'll pause, we'll take a few questions and respond the best we can before we move to the next component. So Jane, I'm going to pass things over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Barb. So part one, Rebecca, next slide. There we go. So part one, so this is about reframing face-to-face meetings into virtual approaches. Next slide. So I think all of us are probably, well, we definitely are in the same boat in that we probably had these conversations within our offices in terms of, you know, for any upcoming face-to-face engagement, we all have the same questions of, should we cancel it? Should we postpone? We don't know how long this is going to last for, or do you try to do it virtually? So we believe here at Stratos strongly in business continuity. So even if COVID-19 has kind of thrown wrenches at us, we're going to try and keep moving forward. So we want to know from you. So get ready again to use that chat function. So think about a workshop you recently organized or attended, or you're currently planning, and now try and picture doing that virtually. So getting it done virtually. So what kind of challenges do you anticipate? Significant challenge for remote communities or workplaces if their internet isn't high speed. Thanks, Glenn. We also work with a lot of Indigenous communities and definitely face this challenge. So having technical difficulties, time zones, lack of personal connection, moderating large groups, it's all coming in at the same time. Everyone has to sit down, get screen fatigue, attention, absolutely. Reading the room, yeah, you don't see if people are getting fidgety. Language barriers, absolutely. Respecting Indigenous rights and desires, distractions. So lots of challenges, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the hurdle that everyone is thinking about do we move forward with a virtual approach? I'm going to ask it to skip to the next one. So absolutely, there are definitely challenges, but we do want to share some of the benefits or the perks of if you do decide to shift gears into having a virtual engagement. So the first one is flexibility and accessibility. So think about it, if you don't have a venue, you're not constrained in terms of the capacity of the room and how the allotted time that you have. Say if you were planning on a 1-day or 2-day meeting, you're no longer confined by those same constraints. And this actually can open up quite a few opportunities, which we'll talk about in a moment. And also it does allow for accessibility for people who might have mobility issues. You can also get a wider or more targeted audience. So again, thinking without those constraints, if there's part of your agenda that you want to broadcast more because you feel like more people need to know about something, you can ask many more people to join in without added cost. But also if you want another part of your agenda to be quite a bit tighter so that you have a more focused conversation, people can jump on and jump out quite easily, more easily than in person. Reduced expenses, obviously, in terms of no travel costs, and not that we have a choice right now, but especially if this was in the future as well. And again, we're a sustainability consultancy, and we, before COVID-19, we were thinking about, in some cases, do we have to do fewer in-person engagements? And some of our clients are asking that as well in terms of reducing emissions and trying to align with climate policies. And the last one, and there are many other benefits as well, but it's just to build your team capacity. So if you start moving in this direction and show that it can be done well, then your team also gets more familiar with these tools and these approaches and have the mindset to keep moving forward in collaborating virtually and ultimately, hopefully, boost productivity as well. So just a few perks again. I'm sure that there are many more that I'm not mentioning here. So the next slide. We're gonna go through 3 tips for this part 1. So the first one is designing an approach with the working from home in mind. Then we're gonna consider the options, and then we're gonna play around with a few tools. So we'll go to the next one, or the first tip. So design an approach with working from home in mind. So regardless if this was in person or virtual, you're gonna start with your objectives. So why are you gathering people? And in some cases, you think critically about it because you might not need to gather someone. And I think a lot of people are realizing that they can use fewer meetings in some ways now that we're working in this way. But think about your objectives. So why are you gathering people? What do you hope to achieve by the end of it? What will be done differently after the meeting? And how do you want people to feel in terms of that experiential aim? We threw down a few objectives here because we do a lot of facilitation, and almost every engagement covers these buckets here. So usually there's some part about sharing information, presenting out. There's usually something about trying to get feedback from the people that you're engaging. Then maybe you shift to something about discussing something, collaborating on a project, trying to move something forward. Maybe it's quite specific and you need to make a decision or come to consensus. And then usually too, you're trying to network, especially if it was in an in-person engagement, and have fun. So think about your objectives, because this doesn't really change if it's virtual, from in-person to virtual. But what does change for designing an approach for working from home is when. So think about breaking it up. And some of you may have already done this already, but instead of a 1-day or a 2-day meeting, most people, especially in today's constraints, can't really take a full day out of their workday, especially if they have kids at home or something else. So think about, breaking it into sessions. So for us recently, we are organizing what was supposed to be a 2-day workshop in April with 75 people from across the country. We are now redesigning that agenda into several smaller sessions over the course of a month, and making sure, again, it's targeted for the right people. So think clearly as well about what can be done on people's own time, so that you provide them with that flexibility, and what needs to be done together, and try and break up your agenda by thinking in that light. Another tip is thinking about who needs to be involved when, and it goes back to people joining, asking more people to join. Say if there's information out that you want lots of people, or if you want it over only a few people, you can easily do that when you're doing it in this approach. So expand or limit participation as you wish. And then also it goes back to think about your audience, which Barb is going to talk about as well, but and then we can choose the right tools. But is it a high tech or is it a low tech? And so Glenn had mentioned earlier that, in terms of Indigenous communities, there are times when you can't use high tech, and I will be sharing some tools, but there's still some more old-fashioned approaches of doing things as well, in terms of just over the phone, or only audio and no video. So think about who your audience is. Next slide. So consider your options. So we just went through those objectives in terms of sharing information and getting feedback. And now I'm going to share some of the virtual options for that. So the first one is sharing information, is what we call often information out. So think about doing this on your own time. Either you can send in advance a pre-read, like a document, or even do a recording on your own time and ask your team or whoever to watch it in advance. If you're nervous that you feel like they won't, you can often just send it a little quiz afterwards, or ask them to answer a few questions to keep them engaged and make sure that they get that information. Or you might still want to keep it interactive and share information through a webinar, and mix it with an interactive live polls or Q&A or chat functions, kind of like what we're doing today. In terms of getting feedback, you can do this pre or post online surveys. And again, there are lots of tools in terms of getting feedback. There's more opportunity to get feedback in an online, because some people don't want to speak up in person. And so there are lots of tools that kind of democratize that and make it a bit more anonymous. So you might actually get even more quantitative data as well, in terms of getting feedback and making it interactive by doing it virtually. When we thought about the challenges, some people said breakout groups or kind of that plenary discussion. How do you do that virtually? We'll actually test it out today, but you can do breakout groups virtually, and so you can still have some of that same experience that you would from an in-person engagement, and using the various tools that are available. Making decisions, this one, it really depends on what it's about, and often that just takes a strong facilitation technique and use of dialogue, so it's old-fashioned. But there's also other virtual options that you could do if you wanted to make voting or hands up, and trying to get consensus across the team and different visual ways of seeing things. So you can still use some tools. Another challenge that people mentioned was, how do you keep that networking, or the keeping people connected? You can get creative, and you can still network and do one-on-ones within different tools that are actually quite creative. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that. And you can try and make it fun and have that experiential element to it as well. And so people had mentioned staying active throughout. I did a Fit Mom class on Zoom for the first time last week. There's a lot of people, I think, who are kind of getting into this. So if you wanted to try and incorporate that into an agenda just to give people a jolt of energy, there's they might even feel more comfortable doing it online than in person in the middle of a workshop. So might actually be a benefit. So those are some options. And again, I'll pause for questions afterwards, but we'll keep moving. So playing around with digital tools. So I'm listing a few here, but there's so many. So I'll kind of invite you to do your own research. But in general, for video conferencing, most people would want some kind of video conferencing platform. Zoom actually seems to be taking kind of the lead right now because of its ease of use, its ability to do breakout groups and polls, and there's a lot of functionality within Zoom. But if you're on Microsoft or Google, or you already have a system, you might want to practice with what makes sense for you. So Microsoft Teams, we use that at Stratos all the time. My husband uses Google Hangouts all the time with his work. Other people might be using WebEx, so use what makes sense for you. If you're using a program that does not have the type of functionality in terms of trying to make it interactive, you can build that in usually using different apps. And so you can make your presentations quite interactive. We use something called Mentimeter, where it's kind of embedded in your PowerPoint presentation. People use their phones and answer like a survey question, and it pops up immediately on the screen, nicely embedded. So there are different ways of doing that. Slido also is a great for Q&A, or if you have like an Ask Me Anything, you could use Slido so that all of the participants can vote for the best question to pose. So again, there's more specific tools that are around to make presentations interactive. If you need to do real-time collaboration, you might still just be using the same document, but you could also be using kind of web whiteboards like Miro, or a web whiteboard, the AW. There are lots of them out there, so I won't talk too much about them. And then there are two that at the bottom about networking and virtual event management platforms that I think are quite interesting. These actually are women-run startups, which is interesting. So we talked about networking. I've used Braindate in the past. It's a service you often for large conferences like TED or other large ones where you really want to have that kind of bump into somebody at the coffee, like getting coffee, and you want to have purposeful networking. Braindate helps you do that, and it's a really curated platform to help people meet the right people. Now they have Braindate Virtual, so it's the same kind of curated experience to help manage that awesome networking. So I invite you to take a look at that one. And then Run the World is new. I've never used it, but it's run by two women, formerly at Facebook, and it's backed by some pretty big investors in San Francisco. And what this is, if you're trying to shift your entire event to be online, it's that platform. So think about it like an Eventbrite meets Zoom because it has video conferencing, meets LinkedIn because it has a lot of networking capabilities, and it's a really simple platform to build your online experience from the beginning to end, and different agendas and lots of different functionality to engage your users in this type of online setting. So I invite you to take a look at that. Again, I've never used it, but I think it's actually really interesting and will probably get a lot of traction in today's environment. So all of these, this is not an exhaustive list. Some have a price to it, obviously. Some are free depending on your scope. So I invite you to take a look and see what makes sense for you. Next slide. So let's play a little bit. So we have quite a few people online. Well, I don't think we've done it with this many, but we're going to test out the breakout groups. So in 3 minutes, you're going to be with about 3 or 4 people. I want you to just briefly introduce yourselves and just maybe name an organization or something. And then just discuss which tools you're interested in using or testing going forward. And I have the list of them down there again. But Adam is going to separate you into breakout groups right now. And then in 3 minutes, you're going to have to push a button, I think, that will say join back to meeting. So don't forget to push that button to make sure you come back. Let's try it.
Hi, do you hear me?
Okay, we'll give everyone a few minutes. So that was exciting. If you haven't done a group breakout before on video conferencing, hopefully it worked out for you. If you had any challenges, by all means, please write something in the chat box so that we can see that.
Sorry,
and
Jane, just to interrupt for a moment, we're still missing about half the people, so the room will close in another 15 seconds, and then I think they'll be forced back here. So you might want to just give them a sec.
Okay, I'll try and, do we still have time for people to do the annotate?
Yeah.
We're good? Okay,
Sure.
great.
Okay, and it looks like we have most everyone back now.
Great, Rebecca, can you go to the next, the slide before? We're gonna do one more thing before passing it over to Barb. So hopefully that worked out. I was saying for the breakouts, if you had any problems, just put something in the chat function. I'm going to ask everyone, we'll see how this turns out, but if you go to the top, I'm gonna ask everyone to say which tool you're most interested in. So if you scroll to the top of your screen, you'll see hopefully something that says you are viewing Rebecca's screen, and then click on view options, and then go down to annotate and click on annotate, and then you'll get this toolbar. Now I'm gonna ask everyone to go to the stamp and get the star and put a star beside one of the tools that you're interested in. And this is like a whiteboard function almost that you can, oh, there we go. It's going. Look at all those stars. And drawing.
Sorry, I'm on my smartphone and I can't find the star, so that red line was an accident.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks, Tanya. And a heart. People are getting creative. Okay. Well, I think, Rebecca, I'm hoping there's a way, people are still going, but as we move to the next slide and I pass it over to Barb to continue, that these stars move away so that
I'll clear them, Jane.
Thanks. Awesome. We should take a quick snapshot, but looking good. Okay, Barb, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jane. There was a couple of questions about the breakout group function that were asked in the chat line, Jane. And we're still learning a little bit about these functions ourselves, to be completely honest. So one of the questions was whether or not the amount of time on the countdown from the breakout groups to return, was that customizable, or does it have to be 1 minute? And Adam, do you know the answer to that?
I believe it's fixed, but I'm not certain.
Yeah, we can easily, what we could do just to help.
Yes, you can customize, says Alex Del Castello.
Oh, thank you. Okay. We're learning as we go. One of the other things you can do is you can customize the number of people. So one comment was groups of 3 felt small, but you can make groups whatever size you want, and you can have it randomly selected, which is what Adam did for us. But if you also want to select your groups and customize who is who, because you maybe want everyone from one region together or one sector together, you can do a bit of customization before you invite people to go into their breakout groups. So it's a really neat function of the Zoom technology. And as some people have pointed out, it's quite efficient in terms of focused conversation and fairly seamless transition back into plenary. I also noticed that there was a question about sharing the deck, and I didn't mention at the beginning, but we are making a recording of this delivery of the presentation. It doesn't include all the chat that's along the line, but the delivery of the content is being captured as a recording. We're going to circulate that to folks who signed up and registered by logging in today, and we'll also have it available on our website with some additional tip sheets. So those are a few questions. I'll turn it over to Adam and Jane to comb through and see if there's anything else that we should speak to when we get to the end of my section next. So Now we have sort of had the opportunity to think, okay, normally I would do face-to-face. If I think a bit about it strategically, I could actually see doing this remotely in different techniques and different stages. So we thought that maybe it would be important to pause for a few minutes in our webinar to just share with you some what we're calling meeting management best practices for virtual gatherings. And this could be for teleconferences, which I know a lot of you are joining these days. It could also be for something like this, where it's a larger forum or there's a video component. We've tried to model some of these meeting management practices throughout our session. We don't always get them perfect, but we have some guidelines that we thought we'd share some of our tips. So maybe I'll start with just a quick overview of the tips that we're going to cover. So Rebecca, can you go to the next slide, please? So there's 5 basic, oh, there's one typo. I'm sorry. Take your audience into account as our first one. I'm so sorry. It was a capital Y and I changed it to a small u for some reason. Take your audience into account is our first tip. Get yourself organized in advance is the second one. Helping people with virtual etiquette is the third one. A piece around effective questioning, and then clear meeting follow-up. So I'm just going to briefly run through each of those tips. Also, just a heads up, we have a summary of these tips on the website. So feel free, if you don't catch all the details that I cover now, you can certainly download that later and have access to it at your own convenience. So the first tip, take into account your audience. So especially where we are in our world right now, our audience has a lot going on. Each of us are working in very new environments. And as we think about having virtual meetings or remote teleconferences, it's important to factor in your audience as you do your design and as you run your meetings. You need to acknowledge that a lot of folks are distracted. They've got kids, they've got pets, they've got differences around them that they're just not used to working towards or working within. A lot of folks will need flexibility. Some people are working reduced hours. Some people are having to split up their days between duties that they have to carry on with their household responsibilities. So keeping that in mind is important. Our audience also wants to be effectively engaged. One of the rules of thumb is that you need to try and engage people every 5 minutes or so to keep them involved. And people want to participate. They've got things to say. Just because they're working from home doesn't mean they don't want to be engaged anymore. We need to recognize that it's hard for people to concentrate for long periods. So that notion of one full day of a workshop being online is not likely feasible anymore. So think through the fact that we can only concentrate for shorter periods. Some folks are intimidated by new technology, myself included. It's a bit scary to look at all those tools and think, how could I possibly run them? Tapping into those colleagues that are more comfortable with technology is the first really good step. And then recognize, though, that those colleagues that you're working with through teleconference and video conference may also be intimidated. And also recognizing that folks may have limited bandwidth, especially communities that are remote, northern communities, some indigenous communities don't have as much bandwidth. So video conferencing itself might even be difficult. So you might need to lean more into teleconferencing, but there's some still good practices that you can implement as you go along. So moving on to the second tip is really about getting yourself organized in advance. So here, I like to say that most of the work for running a really good virtual meeting is done well before you even go live. So these practices are very much what you would keep in mind if you were doing face-to-face, but they just have a slightly different nuance as you think about virtual. So as you would with any face-to-face meeting, having clear objectives, agenda, and timelines up front is really important. And that's the place that Jane started, if you recall. She said, what is it you need to get out of your time together and design accordingly? So having clear objectives is still extremely important. Providing good, clear logistical information on the invitation is important. Contact information for help. What's the link? Is there any etiquette you're asking of people? Do you want them to log in advance? Helping set them up for success before they even arrive is really critical to your success too. You may wish to invite participants to do some pre-work to help them get engaged, to also start to warm up the room before people even show up. The fourth one that we suggest is consider having 2 co-hosts. In fact, we have 4 co-hosts to run this workshop today. Some of us have content expertise, some of us have technical expertise, and we're playing different roles to help deliver this product. To do it all by yourself would be quite overwhelming, and so that's why we encourage you to have some team members actively involved in the leadership. The fifth one is practice, 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 and if you can, do a dry run. Of course, if you're just having your normal team staff meeting, you don't need to do that. But if you're engaging external parties and you have a bigger group and a more complex agenda, you may wish to practice in advance to get the timing right and the delivery of the tools correct. Working to keep people engaged, as I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that, but trying to build in engagement throughout your session helps people not retreat into being observers, but helps their voice to be heard. The seventh one we suggest is limit the number of new tools. So pick a couple of those tools. Some of them Jane's talked about. You may have others. Get yourself comfortable with them so that you can help lead those folks that are joining you through the process and through the tool. And the last one is, I'm saying consider visual impact. So as you think about hosting a webinar in particular, it's something where there's video, think about how your appearance is. So you know that one about getting dressed? Well, that would be a good first step for running a webinar. But then, you know, think about your backdrop, make sure your audio is clear, your video is clear, just to make the experience a professional one for you and for your colleagues that you've invited to join you. I'll move to the third tip. The third one is focused on helping people with virtual etiquette. So here is sort of just helping people to be at their best. People have got ideas, they've got things to say, but there's a few areas that we can help coach or guide people as they interact with the platform, with the teleconference, or with a video conference. So like when you first joined, I helped explain the mute and unmute, and that we made the decision to try and encourage people to keep themselves on mute as much as possible to help minimize background noise. For large groups, that's probably the easiest thing to do. But even you know what it's like being on a teleconference, and there's folks that aren't unmute. So gently reminding people of what your expectations are to help manage the whole room, the whole conversation is helpful. Sometimes it's helpful to have a speakers list, especially when it's a smaller group and you have maybe 10 or 12 people, so that people aren't speaking over top of each other and they know when it is their turn. You might suggest a speakers list up front. Maybe it's going from east to north to west, or maybe it's by first name alphabetical. But just give people the heads up that I'm going to be coming to you in this order every time we need to do a roundtable, giving them the option to pass if they don't have something to say. And then a third very small but easy tip is using the chat function for people to ask questions. Hands up is also a function. We haven't used that one yet in Zoom, but that's also a good way for people to indicate, I've got a question, and that allows the moderator to know without any disruption to the process or to the conversation that the moderator should break and check in with the questions if it is appropriate time and a good time to pause. So those are just some basic virtual etiquette tools we thought might be helpful for you. The fourth set of tools is around posing effective questions. So this too is also probably just as applicable to face-to-face, but there's a few, again, small nuances that make a real difference when it's teleconferences or video conferencing that you're running. So I like to suggest you have a bit of a questioning strategy in advance. Think out when you're going to ask questions, because usually we have meetings because we're looking for input oftentimes. And so thinking through when you want to ask questions is important so that you don't get to the end of the meeting and go, oh, I didn't actually hear from anyone. There's various tools. We've demonstrated some of them today to ask those questions and to solicit feedback. But you might want to think, and this is the third tip, about how you actually frame those questions. And this becomes really important when you're on teleconference in particular. So, you know, the open-ended question, does anyone have something to say about this, can be a great way to get information, but it can also be a nightmare if everyone says yes at the same time and then you don't know where to start. You've probably had that happen to you. So having that speakers list is a way to help work through open-ended questions, just to give a little bit of direction. Reframing a question can also be helpful. So often you will have heard someone say at the beginning of meeting, did everyone get what the document we're going to talk about? And then everyone doesn't know what to say, because if they all say yes, that's not helpful. So actually reframing the question, did anyone not get the document? That helps to target the actual information you need to be receiving so that you can address it. Inclusive questions, someone we haven't heard from. So it's important to be aware of your audience, and if it's important to be hearing from everyone, then as a moderator of a teleconference or video conference, pausing to check in with those who we haven't heard their voice, giving them the opportunity and the space to speak is often an important approach to take when designing and delivering questions. And then finally, sometimes you do need to do a directed question. If there's someone who is a holder of information or who might be the best position to answer a particular question, you may need to direct it and invite that person specifically to respond. I always like to give people a heads up in advance. That may be a strategy I'm using. So please, don't be offended if I'm calling you out. It's usually for a reason, and often they have the content or the information you need, and you're just trying to help people stay engaged. So those are sort of some quick thoughts on posing effective questions. And the last tip that I'd like to flag for you is providing clear meeting follow-up. So your meeting doesn't end when you hit the leave meeting necessarily. And in a seminar like this, we're going to be providing the recording, like I mentioned. I should have said that at the beginning, and I'm letting you know now that that's what our meeting process and follow-up will be. But for others, you might want to think about an option also in addition to recording, but maybe you assign someone to take notes, just like you would in a face-to-face meeting, but then being clear with your participants about what the notes are going to be used for and how they're going to be disseminated. Another component of meeting follow-up could be the feedback survey, just like you would have an evaluation form at the end of a workshop, using tools like SurveyMonkey to provide feedback on the workshop itself. But also you can use those surveys for very targeted feedback in terms of how people would like to be engaged going forward, or maybe soliciting some very specific information on the topic that you've been discussing during your meeting. So those are just some ideas about best practices for meeting management that you can hopefully apply when you go back to your next teleconference or video conference calls. So I think we were going to have a poll. So we're good to go,
We're good
Adam,
to go. Yeah.
with these 3 choices?
Oh, no, sorry. It's the different poll.
Different poll. Okay. So the one with the 5 choices, Adam?
Yes.
Okay, so this is something that Adam and I have discovered since we went live for this particular meeting, is that we just had a little blip in one of our poll activities. So I invite you to pay attention to the content that's going to come up on the screen. And Adam, should you launch it or do I launch it?
I'll launch it, Barb.
Thank you. So we've put together 5 tips. We've talked about lots of them, but there's 5 that we just said, hey, of these 5, what do you think you might try next when you you're most interested in or you think is most important? Again, it's not particularly material, but we just wanted to demonstrate how a poll could work. So please vote on one of the answers that you think is the tip that you're going to try when you go back to your workplace. So we've got quite a few answers coming in. So maybe it's about recognizing and knowing your audience, doing a practice run, asking frequent questions, good interaction.
Okay, I'll cut the poll and share the results.
Oh, there's still some coming in, Adam.
Oh, you're right, sorry.
We've got good participation, folks. We can see, just so you know, as moderators, we can see that 95 out of 123 have voted so far. So thank you for being engaged, just so you know. And maybe we'll just take another second or 2 if anyone else wants to put one last vote in, because I do know there's a bit of lag time, especially if your connectivity isn't strong, and or you may be doing it by phone, so may be limited. So that's great, Adam. So, oh, there's another one. So it looks like, and Adam, can you see the results?
Yes, I've shared them. Everybody should hopefully be able to see them.
So the top one is the plan for interaction and engagement, frequently with a couple of good tools. So you can see how quick and easy that is. In this instance with the poll, we designed the questions in advance so it was ready to roll. But you can actually also create a poll right on the spot as the moderator if there's something you want to check in with folks on that a hands up or a thumbs up wouldn't do the trick for. A poll is another way you can do it. So we'll stop sharing the results of that. And just, were there any questions, Jane or Adam, in this section before we move? And I realize we're tight on time, so we probably need to move to Adam's section pretty soon.
Yeah, there was a few folks had some conversations around challenges, especially I think some of the folks on the line who work for government with security and just needing to balance the need of that with some of the promise and potential of these tools.
Right.
There was a question around whether it's acceptable to ask people to use personal internet and computers to access a Zoom meeting.
Right. And those are great questions. And I know in the short term, a lot of people are having to use personal access, especially with the complications with VPN. I expect that more guidance will be coming on that in the days and weeks to come as we navigate the new territory. Great. Okay, so Adam, I think we're going to transition to you now. And just as a reminder, folks, that the first two chunks of our meeting were really about how to structure virtual meetings and engagements as part of digital collaboration. This next piece is also about digital collaboration, but it's about tools and information management. And so I'm going to invite Adam to just sort of set the context so you can situate yourself as we move through this last segment about the application of these ideas and concepts to your workspace.
Thanks, Barb, and thanks, Jane. Just because we are a little late on time, I might go a little over. I would invite anyone who's able and interested on staying to maybe stay on the line for a little bit past the end of the hour, but totally understand if folks need to leave. We're all busy. So Jane and Barb talked to you about new methods and technologies and tips for communicating and convening digitally. I'm going to shift the focus a little bit to some tools we can use to bring our information and workflows online to help manage the way a piece of work passes from initiation to completion within our organizations, our program, or our projects. Under normal circumstances, these kind of tools can provide a range of benefits and a more modern way of working, but I think in the context of everybody works remotely all of a sudden, and interacting online, these tools become even more valuable. So while this part of the webinar might feel like a bit of an oddball, as Barb mentioned in the introduction, it's still very much a key piece in adapting to the change we're all working through. And what I'm going to describe may be a bit out of your wheelhouse or it might be right up your alley. Either way, as you listen, I'd love for folks to think about what challenges you and your colleagues face in managing data, information, or work processes. And we hope this will spark some ideas and maybe help set up some of the right conversations within your own organization. Next slide, please. Thanks. So what are your widgets? Every organization has different things they care about. They need to track or use to deliver on your mission and your objectives. The information that you reference, the data that you collect, the workflow that defines how work proceeds in your organization. For us at Stratos as a consulting firm, it's projects. We have clients. We have different projects associated with those clients, and it's always helpful for us to be able to track information in a structured way and to be able to log different characteristics of those projects and those clients. And that's useful for managing our work. It's useful for reporting, for referencing and finding old information, having a beat on our business health and also our business intelligence so that we can actually learn more about the work we do and our own business. So having the right tools in place also allows us to more effectively do the work that we care about and that has an impact and spend less time fiddling around on administrative tasks or shuffling around in Excel sheets. And so when I ask, what are your widgets? It's the things you care about. It's the processes that could flow a little smoother or the information you could track a little better. And we all have those things we need to keep on top of. And often I think a lot of that information is being held in a host of logs and registries and trackers that might be in Excel sheets and Word files and so on. So there's a few options or things I put up on the screen here. If you're a grants and contributions shop or a foundation, that might be funding proposals. If you're a conservation organization, your widget might be protected areas. a few other options there. But I might pause and just ask folks on the line to share something that you track or some information or process that you manage that, that this might apply to. And all right, well, maybe we'll just, oh, there we go. Approvals and signatures, that's absolutely one. Work plans. Advocacy engagement moments with MPs and senators. It's, yeah, so all these risks, big data, planning and consultation processes. Thanks, everyone. So all those different things that you track and that are just helpful to have in a nice format, in a way that's referenceable, in a way that you can collaborate on that information and that data with your team. Grant writing is another one. Thank you. Next slide, please. So some common issues that we've come across in our own work, and also I think in working with our clients that are exacerbated by the current situation. There's a few I've thrown up on the slide here, a lot more out there. I imagine folks can maybe find themselves in some of these, the challenges in finding information, you know, knowing you've written something before and taking the time to search through Outlook or directories and not being able to find it. Trust in the integrity of your data, I think, especially if you're working or relying on Excel sheets where things can get moved or deleted accidentally and often. General user experience, especially needing to access files with VPN. And finally, I think maybe a bit of a wasted opportunity in a lot of organizations right now is difficulties of using your data to make better decisions and to more effectively achieve your organization's goals. Next slide, please. So that was maybe a bit of a long road to get to what we're talking about, but we wanted to highlight a relatively new class of software known as lower or no-code database and application builders. Not too long ago, most customized software applications required long development time, specialized knowledge, and lots of large budgets. And these types of tools can be developed quickly, and they can be created by anyone on the line here. We thought it was important to highlight these services in this webinar because we found them to be pretty transformational in our own work, as well as working with some of our clients, and just wanted to share that insight. And in a remote working context, they can really enhance collaboration and coordination in the work we do between meetings, and also act as a platform for considering and visualizing information live within a meeting. So we've highlighted a few examples of tools we enjoy and have come across below that I would encourage folks to check out if you have time. But basically, they allow anyone to create tools that are usable, attractive, and allow organizations to take ownership of their own data and workflow. And we'll jump into these just to show you what I mean in just a moment. Next slide, please. Thanks. So some of the benefits, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but they're cloud-based. There's no need for VPN. I know security is important and a big consideration for a lot of folks. And so a lot of these do offer different security features and standards, and that's something that you always need to consider, depending on the sensitivity of the information, obviously, that you're storing there. They're quick to develop and iterate on. It's really not as hard as you think. You know, folks, it's the sort of thing that takes days to learn and to develop and weeks to deploy. Customized to your organizations. I think we're all the experts on our own organizations and businesses and programs, and we know what we need and we know what we don't. They're mobile friendly in this age where a lot of people are working off their phones, and all sorts of integrations and automated workflows to make your work a little smoother. So with that, I'm just going to take control of the screen to show you quickly, shouldn't take too much more time here, but quickly what we're talking about. And let me share my own screen. Okay. So here's an example of a quick project and proposal tracker that we created with just some dummy data in it that maybe looks familiar to a lot of people, where you're tracking something. In this case, it's projects and proposals, and they have a bunch of fields associated with them: components, values, when they're due, types and values and equations and whatever else. And it's a long sheet, and they get the job done, but in a lot of ways, they're a challenge, right? It's difficult to ensure that the data you're putting in there is right. Sometimes it can be hard if it's on a VPN system because it's locked if somebody else is in it. You need to work on it at the same time, so people are downloading them. Anyways, there's issues. So what we've done, and one of the tools that I had shared earlier, this is an example in NAC, we've transformed that sheet into just an online database application, essentially, which with the exact same information, and this just took a couple hours to put together. but where we have the project name, the proponent, the value, the fields and conditional formatting, all the same type fields that we saw in our Excel sheet, except instead of having to enter those in a big row, we can do it in a form that is more amenable to large chunks of open text, to controlling for fields like proponents, to having multi-selects and different things like that. Another advantage is integrated reporting on a lot of these tools. So we can take that data then and say, like, I want to see the value of proposals coming in that are associated with some field that I'm characterizing it by. And that might be conservation, and do a quick drill down on what those projects actually are. Just to give you a sense, and again, I know this might be a little bit out of some folks' wheelhouse, but what putting something together would look like on the back end, actually creating it, it's pretty simple. You say, I have projects that I need to track, and there's certain fields that I need to track for them. And they can be dates, and they can be multiple choices, and they can be currency values. Maybe we want to track notes associated with our projects, and so we can just add a new notes field. And it's as simple as that. And then that's going to be part of the data that we're tracking. From the front end, then we would just add whatever views we want to see. So in this case, it's a table of my projects. You can see there, or maybe a form to add new projects. And it's really easy to quickly customize those things to whatever your needs are. So I'll pause on that one. One other example I just wanted to show to give you a sense that these are different tools and they all have different strengths. This is a quick sample we put together of a risk register in a different tool. This one's called Bubble. And again, it doesn't take a whole lot of time to put together or to learn how to use these things, but you can see we have a number of risks that we might want to track as our organization. Again, we could enter those in a nice structured way. There's a risk that something happens, be able to characterize the risk however we like, decide how big of a problem it is. And then once we've added those risks into our tool, we can collaboratively work on these things if we're a distributed workforce, rather than having to try and manage doing this kind of thing in an Excel sheet. And so we could track a whole bunch of information associated with that risk. Maybe it's how long it's been active, the treatments associated with it, whatever else it might be. But it's just sort of moving from those files that are a little harder to trust and a little harder to work on together, especially for the really important data and workflows for our organizations, to more modern, flexible solutions that folks in your own business can sort of pick up and create relatively quickly and fairly affordably. So I'm going to stop sharing there because I'm recognizing we're three minutes over time here. I know I went through that fairly quickly, but I hope folks sort of found themselves in there, or maybe had some ideas sparked when I was going through that. Rebecca, do you mind sharing the screen again, please, just for the final slide here? So if there's any questions on data solutions, Barb, maybe, did we get any when I was talking there?
Yeah, Adam, I think, well, one of them was, can we do a heat map with these tools? So we were able to demonstrate with the risk one, which was great. There's also a few different questions about, from the public sector perspective, and information security and the ability to actually use some of these tools. So we might do a little bit more follow-up. We just wanted to present this a bit of a teaser, but Adam, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but that was some of this stream of conversation around usability and accessibility from the public sector side. Yeah,
that's a great question. From a security perspective, so generally if you're looking at like protected B or protected A files, the standard plans are not going to be the sort of thing that have an architecture that's set up to deal with that. A lot of these organizations will have the ability to scale it. So if you wanted to set up something where you could deal with that type of protection on the cloud, it would meet like the Treasury Board standards for that. For non-protected files, generally they have the same or higher security as any cloud infrastructure. So anytime you email a file to somebody, it's also going on the cloud. Our business is entirely on the cloud. So it's, I think maybe from that perspective, it might be more of a procurement issue than a security one, but obviously I don't pretend to know all the intricacies of federal government procurement and security. So probably worth a question to your IT or procurement department. Yeah, and that was certainly one of the suggestions, to check in with your IM IT folks in departments to get that clarity. Yeah, and in terms of the visuals, most of these are fairly open. So if you're thinking about mapping risks or doing heat maps or those kinds of visuals, yeah, all those options are generally available. Great. There's a question about Zoom and if there's a cost.
you can have access to Zoom for free and get limited use, limited number of participants, and a limited time zone, time chunk, so up to 40 minutes. And then there's just different monthly fees for Zoom to have a more expanded use. So you can check out the different rates that are available online. Great. So I think that I just wanted to bring our webinar to a close now. I appreciate that we're running a few minutes late, and I also really appreciate the dynamic conversation that's been happening on the group chat. You have shared so much good practice with us, great questions, and we look forward to following up with you. Just in terms of a recap, remembering that we talked about don't panic. If you had a face-to-face meeting planned, you can do some rethinking and reframing. Invite you to build in some good meeting management best practices as you think about how to engage people in a teleconference, video conference format. And of course, the third part that Adam shared, just to spark your ideas about how to move through some of your workflow and your information management blocks using some of these digital collaboration tools that are available online. So with that said, I just really would like to thank you. Rebecca, maybe we can just go to the closing slide. Just thank you for your time, your energy, your willingness to roll up your sleeves with us. We just felt like this was the time that Stratos needed to reach out to our friends, our colleagues, our networks, and share with you anything that we could in terms of helping to make this transition that we're finding ourselves in. And I really do hope that you have found some of these insights helpful. We'll post up this recording. If you need to get in touch with any of us, there's contact information for Adam, myself. Jane's also available to connect with. And we just put a little snapshot of the tip sheets that we have posted on our website. Much of what the content that we've discussed today has built from those tip sheets. It's just what we've been learning along the way. And we hope that you have found the conversation helpful, and we look forward to hearing from you and future dynamic dialogues. And I love that the whiteboard is still living. That's awesome. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay well, and as they say, be kind to each other. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. Great to see your faces. So nice to see everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. You rock.
Bye-bye. Bye, Sam. Oh, that was Stacy. I saw Stacy. That's great. Hello. And Cornelio, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Take care.
Oh, thank you.
Well done. Good job, guys.
Oh,
Take care.
wonderful. Thank you.
Bye,
Great to have
Cornelia.
you with us. Great
Thank
job.
you, Nadim, for the invitation.
You're welcome. How did you get the invitation, Cornelio?
Through Nadim through LinkedIn. Yeah.
Okay, you guys are friends with Nadim. Wonderful. Good to see you.
Cornelia knows everybody.
Nice to see you. Take care, guys.
Great.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Shall we end the meeting, folks, and we maybe just have a little Teams meeting?
Sounds good. I'll
Okay.
end it now.
Okay, thanks, guys. See you on the other team.